14. Okay, awesome. So let's talk about TypeScript. So if I were to create this function, and let's say this was a really important piece of some code that I was writing. There's very little in vanilla JavaScript to ensure that when I use this function somewhere else, I'm actually doing the right thing. We're going to go ahead and add another thing in here just for additional demonstration. So like if I wanted to use this in a different function down here, some function, and let's say I wanted to generate my random numbers. JavaScript will let me do a lot of different things. So this right here, we're expecting to be an integer so that we can use it in this for loop here. But I could pass like a string, I could pass an array, I could pass an object. And in all of these cases, JavaScript is not going to tell me, hey, this is not what you're expecting. All of these would pass in and be valid. And then once I run this code at some point in the future, it would sort of crash and go haywire in the middle of actually running all of my really important code. And I probably wouldn't do this on purpose. Like I just wrote this code, so I know that I should pass in a number here. But what if I wrote this code like a couple days ago and I've written a lot of code in between then and now and I've kind of forgotten? Or even if I haven't forgotten, I could just do this sort of negligently, not, thinking about it too hard and pass in something that's completely invalid. So now if I try and run this, let's go ahead and run this really quick and see what happens. So right now, if I were to go ahead and put a script in here, let's say start is equal to node index.js. And then we npm start. What is this going to do? All right, this is not actually going to cause us any problems. What if I try and print this? So if we print this, we would expect it to just be an array of 3 numbers or some amount of numbers. It's going to print us an empty array here. So this code didn't actually work. We passed it an object, and in this case, JavaScript decided, you know what, I can work with this. For some reason, it's going to let us enumerate to a maximum value of this empty object, which doesn't make any sense to us. In this case, it's just not actually going to count up this for loop. But like, this is totally not doing what we want. And especially in this case where JavaScript isn't throwing us an error like we see in the console sometimes, we'd have literally no idea what's wrong here until we spend hours pouring through the code and trying to trace down like what went wrong first. Where does the error start from? This silent error that we don't know about. Similarly, like this is an error, but if I were to just randomly use this, if I hover over, I can kind of see what it wants from me. It shows that it wants something called any, which just means like literally any value is fine here. And it's showing me that it does return a numeric array. But also, like if we did something weird here and said maybe if array size is greater than 10, then we're just going to return null instead. So it updates sort of what it's expecting here. And this is implicitly sort of doing the thing that TypeScript does for us. Do you see how like when it tells us that this could be any value, that's like really scary. We want to have some sort of contract so that we as developers know that this function needs a number passed in and not anything else. And we need to know what it's going to give back after it's done processing things. And your IDE, if you use VS Code, is going to really try and help you out with this. VS Code is pretty smart, but if you use an IDE that's not set up with the same plugins that I have, or is not set up with, or you're just using a different IDE, it's not actually going to give you these suggestions. And then you're totally helpless. You have no idea what's going in or out. This is really the reason why you want to use TypeScript. It's for your own sanity, as well as the sanity of other people that are going to be working with the code that you write in the future. TypeScript allows you for variables, so like this num array here, parameters, things that you're passing in, like this array size, your return type, which right now could be null, could be an array. This is probably bad. We would want it to return an array regardless, but maybe we made a mistake and returned something else by accident. Or we had a bug somewhere and the thing that I'm trying to return is a type different than I would expect. In all of these cases, that could be really scary. And TypeScript allows us to guarantee that our types of everything that we're expecting are actually what we want. We are not allowed to write code that passes values to those variables that isn't of the appropriate type. So in this case, if I pass an object in here, TypeScript would say, no, you absolutely can't do that. That's bogus. And we would catch the bug immediately as soon as we write the code, rather than writing all of our code, executing it all, putting it on a live server, realizing there's something horribly wrong, but it's not telling us what's wrong, and spending hours trying to figure out what I wrote that was wrong. TypeScript, literally, as soon as I write this line down here, it'll tell me, nope, you can't do that. That doesn't make any sense. So let's see if we can make this work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from a JavaScript file to a TypeScript file. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, which means anything that's valid JavaScript is valid TypeScript. TypeScript only adds to the base language of JavaScript. And all it does is it enforces that everything has to have a type. And if you don't abide by those types, it's going to get mad at you, which is what you want. So as soon as I change this to a TypeScript file, we notice that now it's telling us there's a bunch of things that are wrong. If I hover over these 3 green dots here, TypeScript is going to tell us this parameter array size implicitly has an any type, which means we didn't give it a type explicitly. We didn't write out a type that this needs to have. And so it assumes that it could be an any type. We can give it any value we want. But that's scary. We don't want that, right? We're using it as an integer so that we can count how many random numbers to generate. And so what we can do is we can annotate it with a type, which in most places is just using a colon, and then writing out the type of this thing. So we're going to say, I have to pass in a number, and I can't pass in anything else. And down here, you'll notice when we call this function, it's telling us argument of type empty object is not assignable to a parameter of type number. So as soon as I try and write this code, it's not going to allow us to do this. And I would have to go ahead and change this to be a number. Maybe we'll change it to 5, and now it's happening. Another kind of scary thing here. Argument of type number is not assignable to parameter of type never. So if I call math.random and hover it over, math.random gives us back a number between 0 and 1, which is, is what we expect. And then math.floor gives us a number as well. And so all these types work correctly. If I were to take this out, this is exactly what we want. And we want numarray.push this value. We'll go ahead and do this in 2 steps. And we're going to push rand_num here. Okay, and so we get this error again. And the reason why we're getting this, if we hover over here, is that we have an array, but we didn't tell it what type is allowed to be in this array. JavaScript allows you to put anything you want into the exact same array. You could have an array where the first thing is a string, the second thing is a number, the third thing is an object, the fourth thing is another array, the fifth thing is null, the sixth thing is undefined. Like, you could do that if you want to, but my argument would be there's really no reason why you would ever want to put so many different things together in one array. Generally, it's good practice for in one array to have one kind of item, so that when you go through that array, you can treat them all the exact same way. maybe you have an array of a bunch of strings. And that way, when you loop through and get each thing and do something with it, you know that they're all going to be strings. Like we can't call the dot length method on an integer. That doesn't exist. It only exists on a string. And here in this case, we want this array to only be numbers. But right now, with regular JavaScript, I could do num array dot push and then an empty string. This would be valid JavaScript. What I can do here is I can annotate this and say, this is a number array. And I want you to let me put anything in here except numbers. So now string is not a type number, so we can't push a string on there. And the only thing we can push is a number. So with this said, we need to actually be able to run this TypeScript. And you can't run TypeScript normally just as is. There's certain NPM packages that allow you to run TypeScript without compiling it first. I think if we installed like Nodimon, we could go ahead and run it. Yeah, let's do this. Let's show you one way of running TypeScript first. If we npm I, so install, and we're going to save dev, which means save it as a development dependency. When we eventually deploy this onto a server somewhere, we don't need this. We only need it while we're working on our local machine, testing things out. We're going to install Nodimon. Nodimon is a package that allows you to run JavaScript or TypeScript code. And anytime you make a change, it'll automatically refresh. You don't have to like stop the console and then start it again. React already does this for you in Create React App, and also if you use something like Vite. But just executing vanilla TypeScript doesn't do that. So now if we change this to be Nodimon index.ts, let's see if this works. TS node exec. I think there's something missing. TypeScript Nodimon. TS node. Okay, that's another thing we need to install. Let's see if this works. All right, this didn't actually. Oh, there we go. It printed out our array here. So it generated 5 random numbers. We know that everything works exactly how we want because we've given ourselves a contract that all these things have to be of a specific type. And we don't have to go back and debug any of this because all of these errors we made that otherwise we would have to run it, identify there's an error, figure out where the error comes from, spend a bunch of time working on it. We all caught this at compile time, like when we finished writing our code before we were ready to run it. We caught everything. So that's the value of TypeScript. I would say once you are familiar with TypeScript, and even if you're not right now, you should like literally always use TypeScript. I don't think there's really any valid reason at this point to do things in vanilla JavaScript. TypeScript also works for React. Like you can, instead of using prop types, you can write, instead of .jsx files or .js files, you would write .tsx or .ts files. And now everything, again, is going to be bound by types. So anytime you create a variable inside of your component, it needs to have a type. Anytime you have a property that gets passed in, we have to know exactly what type that property is so that we know how we can handle it. And again, it just basically guarantees that you're doing everything correct. And anything you don't do correct that if you were writing in vanilla JavaScript would take you a while to realize, or would take you until you ran it, it's going to identify it immediately. There's a couple of questions here. I want to really quick try and see if we can do this the other way. We're going to build this tsc index.ts. Of run is going to be. I hope this will work. Let's see if this works. Okay, so if we build, it's going to run TypeScript compile, which it looks like it's doing successfully. Nice. And what it does is it creates a JavaScript file where it's taken all of our TypeScript features and generated code to remove them, which in this case doesn't really change anything. All it's done is sort of change our const to var. But if we had something a lot more complex that had lots of different types and some types that are more complex than just number or number array, it'll generate some code so that everything you do in your TypeScript file becomes valid JavaScript. Again, TypeScript has extra features, so those type annotations are not valid JavaScript, but TypeScript will compile your type annotations and everything, and it'll create all of your TypeScript files as vanilla JavaScript files. And there's lots of very smart ways of doing that I don't even know. And once you've compiled it all down, that's the code that you will typically want to run on your production system. So if you have a server running somewhere in the cloud on Google Cloud, you would want to set up your project so that when you push new changes, at some point it generates your new JavaScript files and then runs those instead of your TypeScript. You don't want to run TypeScript generally in the real world. Okay, I think Vite React has some kind of built-in TypeScript compiler, and sometimes it yells at me if I don't type your props. Yes, Vite is really, really cool. Again, outside of this class, I would probably not use Create React App either. Create React App is a very old way of putting together a React application that is very, very slow. You probably have noticed it's very, very slow, even though your projects are pretty small. Like if you, the size of your to-do apps right now, multiply that by like 20, and then that, like imagine how slow Create React App is going to be if you have like 20 times the size of your website. So Vite is a different tool that can sort of bootstrap you by creating a React project and all the dependencies that make it work that are required in your node modules. And it has lots of different sort of higher tech ways of starting up your server, building all of your React code into like vanilla JavaScript that actually runs in the real world and things like that. And it also allows you to create projects with different packages and tools that kind of help you out. Create React App, I don't think allows you to do it, but Vite allows you to create a TypeScript template. So your React will be by default set up for TypeScript and you don't have to set up anything yourself, which is really cool. Vite also allows you, if you want to use different front-end frameworks. So React is a front-end framework. And we write our React code, which is all these rules that Facebook has defined about what makes valid React. And then behind the scenes, Create React App or whatever, turns your React code into vanilla JavaScript that actually runs in your browser and does all kinds of really complicated things. Vite does the same thing for React, but you could also do it for Vue, which is a different framework. You could do it for Svelte, which is also a different framework. You could do it for, I have the name in my head. It starts with an A, Angular from Google. That's a different framework. So Vite is really cool. Yeah, you're way ahead of me. So Vite is really cool. I would definitely recommend trying out Vite if you end up working on a different React project, like maybe for your practicum. If you guys are doing practicum, that would be a good thing to explore and get set up. It'll help you put together all these things without you having to do it, similar to how Create React app does. Should we be avoiding the use of var? Yes. Generally, you should probably not use var in your own code. Because this is TypeScript, like once you compile your TypeScript into JavaScript, you don't touch it anymore. You don't edit the JavaScript. That's out of your hands. You can edit your TypeScript files and recompile once you make changes, but you don't touch the JavaScript after it compiles. You just run it. So the thing that compiles doesn't really matter to you. It's a guarantee, barring some crazy bug that in TypeScript that hasn't been fixed yet, that whatever it generates is going to behave the exact same way that your TypeScript is defining. So you don't care how it works. So this is totally fine to have var in here. Yes. So dynamically typed, a language like JavaScript or Python means that you can create variables or functions, and there's no fixed type in any of them. So I could have like a variable here. Let's my var equal to 3, and then I can set my vars equal to a totally different type. And this is totally valid. You can do this in Python as well, which, is kind of nice. It's a little bit flexible. You can reuse some things. But like in reality, once you get into a really complicated project, you have to know, you have to have a guarantee as a developer what you're working with. And a dynamically typed language doesn't really let me have that. And that, like, to me as a human being, to Eli, the human being, not to everyone, some people are totally okay with it. It scares me every single time. Anytime I have to write Python, like I just get so angry because I'm trying to like guarantee that certain types work. And then I have to end up writing code completely differently because there is no guarantee that this variable is of this one type. So statically typed means everything has one type and you cannot change that type no matter what you want. You have to create a new variable of a different type in order to have that other thing. And it gives you a lot more guarantees. It allows you to do some different patterns that you become accustomed to, and generally makes your life a lot easier as a developer, especially when things get bigger. TypeScript is statically typed. JavaScript is dynamically typed. Statically typed, in my opinion, is almost always better, unless you're working on something really small that you want to get done very quickly, which is partially why Python is really cool. People like Python because you can put together something really quick. You don't have a ton of rules and contracts that you have to obey that make you write lots more code in order to make something work. So it's really good for prototyping things or for doing manipulations like with data where you kind of know exactly what you're doing. And you're kind of doing it in like a step-by-step order. So you're not really like forgetting that you had a variable somewhere and then, who knows what it's going to be when it comes back. You know exactly what you have because you're doing it step by step. All right. That was a really long explanation. Does anyone have any more questions or anything they're curious about? Any questions about something that's completely unrelated that you're just unsure about, something you maybe heard but don't know about? Okay. With that said, we have 15 minutes left, so we definitely don't have time for anything else that I had planned, which is totally fine. I'm much more happy talking about all of this stuff than going through another feature for this project. So glad we talked about all of this. If there are any questions that come up, if you have any questions, like if you're experimenting with TypeScript, I think the hardest part of TypeScript is figuring out how to get everything set up. And once you get everything set up, for the most part, when you create another TypeScript project, you can literally copy and paste things. But like TypeScript setup, you have to make sure you have all the right packages. Some people will create a tsconfig.json where you can specify all the rules about how TypeScript does that TypeScript to JavaScript compilation, and like where do the files get moved to when they do get compiled. And your tsconfig you can honestly copy from the internet. People will have template files that you can just copy that are really useful. But if you do want to try this out, experiment with some stuff, and you're curious about the setup, feel free to reach out. I've done this a lot of times. It's hard every time. But I'm available as usual. Just let me know. Otherwise, that's all I got. So happy Tuesday. Have a good week. And I will see some of you maybe next week.
Thank you so much.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Eli, if you have a second, I actually had a kind of a specific question, if that's all right.
Yeah, I love specific questions.
Well, I was sort of curious because when I was doing the CSS just like styling thing, I ended up trying to use a couple of different libraries to try and get a specific styling effect that I thought would be hard to code myself. And I noticed just that like libraries are really tricky because you end up looking for a library that's going to achieve some sort of functionality, and you try it, and then it'll do weird stuff, and it's kind of unclear because I'm not under the hood. I'm not actually sort of seeing what's going on. Like, do you have just like recommendations on how to approach libraries, or do you actually go and look under the hood like when you're working with libraries often, or again, that's maybe that's too broad of a question.
This is a really good question. And I think this thing that you're experiencing is very, very common. The only thing that we really have to work with is whatever kind of documentation they give. And there are some libraries that are very large and well maintained, and lots of people use them. And so they have really good documentation. You can generally understand how things work. And there are some libraries where it's like, maybe 5 or 6 lines just telling you how to install it, and then you have no idea like how it works. And also some libraries are just generally easier to work with than others. Something like Material UI is a library that sort of like comes with pre-styled components. You can literally plug and play a component that already has been perfectly styled according to some specification onto your site and make it work. And they have lots of documentation because it's a very popular library and has gone through a lot of revisions. They have pretty good documentation about what they expect, what you can actually pass as a property to those components, and like how to interact with them. And they also have lots of like really good demos about like how do you achieve this specific thing. Yeah, this is exactly what I'm looking at. Like if I go onto a random component on Material UI, let's go to Components API. Let's go to accordion. I don't really know what an accordion is, but if I go through here, like they have demos about how these accordions work. How would you go ahead and import it once you install it? All these properties that you're allowed to use. And then usually down at the bottom, they also have like an example section of where like how to use them, but this doesn't seem to have it. Oh, okay. Up here, like it has demos of this is the component that you can have. This is the base version. This is the code to achieve this base version. Here's all the different ways that it can look, things like that. So Material UI is a really great library. If you're looking to like get a website up and running pretty quickly, and you don't necessarily care a whole lot about having perfect control over stylings, something like that is really great. But because lots of it has been abstracted away from you and you don't have access to it, there's only so much you can do to actually make it look the way you want. They give you access to certain styling properties or certain things you could change, but that's it. So long story short, there's not really a great way of doing it. I think anytime you work with a library, there's going to be growing pains of trying to figure out like, what is this thing? What can I do with it? Is it going to serve my purpose? And there's not really any getting around that. Like the only thing you can do is go through documentation. If you're curious about a specific thing, you know, refine your Google search and try and find like a Stack Overflow post of someone doing the same thing. That usually ends up helping me a lot. If there's like a library where I can't get it to work the way that I want, someone probably has also had the same problem. And there's documentation through Stack Overflow that can also help. But really, it is just a lot of experimentation. Sometimes you'll pick a library, maybe you want to achieve a certain function. There's like 5 different options. You pick one, you know, try it out. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, you try the next one. There's not really a secret to it, unfortunately. It does take time. If not your code, any code that you don't write is going to be hard to figure out. On occasion, if it's an open source library, you can like go and look at very specific things that you're curious about, like what it's doing. Or if you think there is an error, like if you find something that looks like a bug, you might want to go into the documentation and try and trace down like where is that line of code so that you could, you know, create an issue and say, I think this is a bug. Here's the, you know, place that causes it. But that's pretty rare. I think generally you work with whatever documentation you have. And if it's not good enough, move on and try something else. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's the unfortunate answer that I was sort of expecting, which is like it's kind of tough because even I've built stuff with Bootstrap, which reminds me of Bootstrap a little bit, where you have these like styled components that are sort of built with
Yeah,
particular
exactly the
functionality,
same thing.
and I remember when I was working with Bootstrap, I would try and do things that obviously the Bootstrap people didn't expect or wouldn't have wanted me to do. Like I would try and put, you know, a styled component inside of a styled component inside of a styled, you know, like in ways that were probably confusing to it, and it would produce unpredictable behavior, which was frustrating to me just because I just really wanted to know what was going on under the hood, such that I could see if there was a way to fix it. But you know,
Yeah,
that's not
for
always.
something that big, that's kind of a lost cause. And if that's not working the way you expect, you kind of just gotta start from scratch and do it yourself, unfortunately. With something that big, you will you're very unlikely to actually find whatever the root cause is, just because it's so complicated. So I know it's the kind of thing that the more you do it, the more natural it feels to sort of test out a library, and you kind of learn what you're looking for and what will actually help you out.
Cool. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Of course, it's a great question. All right, if anyone else has anything, feel free to message me. I'll be available most of tonight, but otherwise, have a good night. I'll see you guys.
Good night.
All right, take it easy, Eli.